Hey, what's up, everybody? Thank you for joining me for another episode of Leeson Learned. Really appreciate it. Thank you for being here. I'm very excited about today's episode. This guy, you've probably seen his videos on Facebook or on YouTube. He plays some characters. He's doing these comedy videos. He's got millions of views now. I've been a big fan of his for a long time. I got to meet him when I was on the road in the US briefly in early 2020 before the world went all to shit. And got to meet him, got to spend some time with him, and became an even bigger fan. And as soon as we started this podcast, I knew we had to have him on. It's taken a little bit of time, but finally we were able to sit down, and I am very excited for you to check out Mr. Brent Terhune. Brent Terhune. Am I saying that right? Terhune?
Yes, sir. Yeah, people in my own family say it differently, so I've settled on Terhune. That's the correct way in my book.
Okay, Brent Terhune. Buddy, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, man. Good to talk to you. It's weird where you run into people on the road and then you air quotes know them, but yeah, I haven't seen you for over a year.
Right. Which so we met last year in Bloomington, Indiana, right?
Yep, Bloomington, Indiana.
And at a comedy club, the Comedy Attic, and got to, first of all, witness one of my favorite album recordings I've seen done, and certainly made a fan out of me for a guy named Stuart Huff, who is an amazing comedian, I think based out of Kentucky.
Well, I think he lives in Georgia now, but I think he's originally from Kentucky.
Yeah, he was amazing to watch, and I was so thankful. And Ross Duncliffe from On Tour Records I was grateful that he got us the tickets, and it was awesome. And then, of course, after we went to IHOP and had a had a meal at whatever time that was after the comedy show, and which I think is probably the most Midwestern experience I got to have while visiting the U.S.
Was it an IHOP or a Denny's? Because I didn't you say you've never had a Grand Slam? Maybe I don't remember if it was IHOP or Denny's. It wouldn't surprise me.
Well, first of all, that was not me. I have had more
many
Grand Slams.
Okay,
yeah, and it was definitely IHOP because. I remember because I got their sampler, and I think I might have said I never had this one, but I had the Denny's one, and I wanted to compare them, and it was terrible. I must say it was absolutely not good at all.
It's IHOP's never one of those things where I go to during the day. It's like, oh, I know they're open at 11 p.m. And that's one of my favorite things in comedy is to, do the shows, but then also the hangout afterwards sometimes is way more fun than the actual show.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And that was so awesome just to, be there while Stuart fucked around with the waiter. But do you remember how long it took it was like half the table got their meals and the other half did not get their meals for a long time. I mean, we were there for hours.
It was, and it was one of those where I think it was maybe the waiter's first night or first few nights. And one of those where I'm not mad either way because I'm hanging out with people, but it was also, you got to feel for the guy. Because if I was that guy, I'd be like, oh my God, the food's not ready. I would just feel terrible, but he was fine.
Yeah, dude, it was such a hilarious table because there's myself and Tig who are visiting from Canada, heading down to California. Yourself, who is, you don't live in Bloomington, right?
I'm from Indianapolis, which is about an hour north.
Yeah, so you're down there visiting Ross and did you know Stuart before that night?
Yeah, I've known Stuart for such a long time, and the first time I ever saw Stuart, him and I are really good friends now. But before, I've told him I was like, I didn't like you, and I didn't like your jokes for some reason, and it was just probably me being a shitty person, being an open micer, being like, I'm as funny as this guy. Of course I'm not. But in the moment, you're like, why am I not on stage? But yeah, he's a good friend of mine now. But at first, when I saw him, I was like, I got to be honest, I didn't like you. And there's no reason why. I just, so it was Stuart and then Ross from On Tour Records and his wife.
Yeah.
I don't know who else. A bunch of it could have been the
Dude,
Last Supper at IHOP, pretty much.
dude, the other people at that table were a father and son duo who drove some crazy amount of time, like 12 to 16 hours to see the show. We're eating IHOP with all of us, then driving home that
Yeah.
night.
And that Stewart he's a comic that gets those people because if you don't know Stewart and you're listening to the show, he's my favorite comedian. He's, I would say, one of the best comics working today. And the thing is, you've never heard who he is
Yeah.
because for whatever reason, but he's on iTunes and Spotify. Go listen to him. But Stewart gets a lot of those people. They're like, he's not coming to Milwaukee, but they want to see a Stewart Huff show. So they will drive from Milwaukee to Bloomington, Indiana to see the show.
Yeah, I've never had people. People are barely willing to walk across the street from their own house to a venue I am performing at. So for me to be there and having witnessed his show, I completely understood, because you're right. He was unbelievable. I'm so glad I got to listen to him live. And when we left and started when we left there and started our journey to California, we listened to everything he had on iTunes, because it was like, we have to listen to more of this guy. He was that fucking good. And so to have these two guys that are like sitting there for hours listening, being able to take in a meal with this guy they just drove so far to see, and then we're driving home immediately after. Everybody there at some point was like, "Are you guys sure you don't want to stay, like get a hotel?" I think Stuart might have even offered to like put him up, and both of them were like, "No, he's doing first shift and he's doing second shift." And they were just like, coffee and pancakes, I think was their order, but one of them got fucked up because everything got fucked up by this waiter who had a tough night. But anyway, it was one of those memorable nights in comedy where it was just, for me, going from not knowing Stuart Huff to being a massive fan, and then being able to be there around a table full of comedians and these two super fans of comedy was really fun. Really fun.
And it was weird because I think you sat across from me and we had never met before, but comedy is one of those things. And I'm sure it's like a lot like that with a lot of professions where there's a language written into comedy. So you and we already have an understanding and a common, thing we can talk about without and I think then we bonded on wrestling after that too. But it was one of those things where it's like we had never met before, but comedy's that one thing that brings you together.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely, man. And like I'm a huge fan of the videos that you put out, the the like redneck character guy videos, and those are does he have a name?
No, that's the people always ask me, like, what is that character's name? And it's like, at first I'd never thought it would be anything anyway. So I never gave the character a name. And if you're listening to this, but have never seen what people would know me for, it's any kind of guy that would rant in a truck about anything, whether it be millennials and participation trophies or whatever. It's that character who's always ranting about something. So it's a very MAGA character, which that's kind of gone away since, Trump lost the election. But that guy is not going to go away as far as ranting about whatever's going on in the country. So that's a point of reference for people if you've never seen what I do.
Is it based on a specific person, or did you just see enough of those types of videos and start to do like a character like that?
Yeah, the first one I did was based on seeing people burn their NFL tickets after Colin Kaepernick started taking a knee. And then a year later, he got a contract with Nike, I think not even being in the NFL. So those are that contract with Nike one was my first big video that really took off. But then I would see all these people on Facebook because it's so easy to sit in your truck or whatever you drive and record a video. Everybody's got a camera on their phone on their phone. So I have my list of people that I like to follow for inspiration that I will watch from time to time.
That's that's awesome, man. What was it? How long had you been creating videos or making videos before you had one that kind of really took off with views and shares and sort of going viral?
Probably, a year or two before that, because I still live in Indianapolis, and at the time I didn't have an agent or a manager or nobody was going to do anything unless it was me. So,
Right.
and with the internet, it's such a tool that you can use to reach an audience about a very specific subject, because you can go on YouTube or type in any kind of podcast app. There's probably a podcast that is about the topic that you like. There might not be 10 people in your town that like that thing, but now there's a community of people that like the thing that you like. So that's where the beauty of the internet came in. And I just, I was like, I got to learn a different skill, because if I'm just going to stay in Indiana and Indianapolis and work the road, there's got to be a reason for people to come see my show. Because, you know as well as I do, you can do shows where it's the sign out front says comedy night.
Right.
But it doesn't say it's like if they put Jeff Leeson or Brent Terhune on it, they'd be like, we don't know what that is, but they know comedy night. You know what I'm saying? So yeah. I wanted to be the guy that had people show up to my show on purpose, not just because it was Saturday night, So that was my goal with the videos, is to try and reach some other people. And it's so, it's hard to get started, because I had people be like, how do you do videos? I'm like, you just got to do it. And there's always that stage fright of being on camera, but it's like, nobody's seeing that. So you can do 1,000 takes. It doesn't matter. Just record it and upload it,
What was a type of video you were doing before that character? What was the type of videos you were doing prior to that?
I think my first one was called Every Bad Uber Driver. And it was just, me being like, the cops would pull me over and I'd have a bag of green leaves. I don't even know what I used, but of course that's pot, but the driver's like, oh, hide this for me type stuff. Or I did Thoughts at Walmart, and it was just me walking around being like, what is mountain lightning? I don't know if you're aware, but there's Mountain Dew, of course, but then the generic Walmart brand is Mountain Lightning, or Dr. Thunder is the Dr. Pepper version. So you go around and just make jokes in a Walmart. And those were the kind of videos I was doing. But then I just did the character one, and I probably did my first couple of years, probably 8 or 10 of those videos. But then stuff ramped up politically, and I'm not even like a politics guy. I'd rather watch people that follow politics, because that's what that character is not necessarily satirizing political figures, but it's those people that like the political figures. But so that kind of took off, and for months there could be a topic every day that I could talk about. But now thankfully things have cooled down, and it's like maybe once a week there's a big story that you can kind of make a video about.
In the early going, or maybe even now, is it all done by you? Is it all filming and editing and the whole process you, or do you have a team?
Just me. And that was the other thing, was a lot of times I'd be on the road. So it was like, oh, I'm in the middle of Nebraska, and I just saw a story, that broke, and I'm at a truck stop. How do I make this so the car is perfect for a rant thing? Because anywhere I am, the car is too, But it was like one of those things. With podcasting, you teach yourself how to edit, or you teach yourself how to do video, because I'd rather just do it myself, because I know it's going to get done, because I've worked with a team too. And it's also like, then you got to wait on the guy to edit something, and maybe he's got to work till tomorrow. And it's like, we should just get this out now. And especially with those videos I was doing, it's like the topic is hot right now, and tomorrow there's already going to be something new that happens. So, and some of the videos, it's you hold the camera up and you talk for a minute and a half, and that there's no editing. You just kind of upload it anyway,
Right. Now taking it back, like before you started doing the videos, you mentioned living in Indianapolis. Is that where you're from as well?
Yeah, I'm from Indy.
And what were you like in school? Like, were you a class clown type of guy?
I was never the class clown, but I was always funny. but I was never like, I never got detentions really. I did talent shows in high school. That was my first time doing stand up at 16, was in my high school performing. And then I would host
Oh,
Battle of the
wow.
Bands. I
How
was
did it go
making,
at
I got,
16?
uh, fine. It was like every quarter in school, there was a thing called coffee house. So people do acoustic guitar and poetry. And I went up and did stand up. So, I've been doing stand up, I think, for 15 years, but for the first two, I'd performed 6 times or whatever. But, I think it went well. And then eventually my senior year, I got second place in the talent show behind an, alto sax. Still bitter over that. No,
Yeah.
but it was one of those where I was, and then when I turned 18, or even I think I was 16 or 17, going to the local comedy club, and I've always looked older than I am, and nobody asked, and I wasn't being like, let me get a Jack and Coke. I never tried that. I just wanted to go perform. Nobody said anything, and I didn't say anything. So I was performing at a club at 17. And yeah, that was just my early years in stand-up, was just immersing myself in comedy. I'm sure I was unbearable to be around, because whatever somebody would talk about, I'd be like, let me talk about comedy to you, which I'm sure got old fast.
I started at 14.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, doing so my mom wouldn't let me go to like a comedy club. She was like, something happened. She went to a comedy club and like saw somebody get heckled or something. And so she was really against that, me doing that. Cause I was like, I think the only way to do this, from what I have researched, is you have to do 3 or 5 minutes at an amateur night. And that's the only thing I can tell. So she's like, definitely not doing that. But she goes, but let's do our own show in front of our friends, family. I played hockey, so like the hockey team and stuff. Let's sell our own tickets, and we'll sell pop and chips, and let's put on our own thing, and that way you can try it, see if you like it, and then things go well. We can work up to the clubs when you get older.
That's awesome. What was the venue?
It was in the auditorium of her place where she worked. Her work.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, they had this big open room and a kitchen in it where the thing slid up, so you had it was like a snack bar. So it was a good starting place. I don't know what we had, maybe 30, 40 tickets sold, something like that, and everybody that I knew basically. And I teamed up with some guys in a band that I went to high school with, and they opened, and then I came out and did like what I thought was an hour, because I only knew comedy specials really, which ended up being like 28 minutes.
That's still a lot of time for 28 minutes. I remember when I first started hosting, like, you're doing 10, and I'm like, I have to do all the jokes that I have, and some of them I don't want to do, but I got to do 10. So you started out 28 minutes. That's crazy.
Everything I ever thought of, because it was just something I loved comedy, and I watched it every day, and it was I just wrote down thoughts and stuff. So a lot of it was really bad and made kind of no sense and really had no punchline, or some of it was stuff I heard that I didn't know the rules of writing, and I was just like, that sounded funny. I think I could tell that in a way that applies to me, or I think whatever. And so there's a little bit of that. And yeah, but the reason I mention this is because you talked about doing a show at school. And when I was like 15, I did a talent show at school, and it was the first time I really, really bombed and ate shit hard. And then
you had to see those people for the next 2 or 3 years.
Yeah. That was like grade 10. So the rest of that year, all of 11 and 12. Yeah, it was not, but they were, the thing I really liked that helped was they were really impressed that I had the balls to get up and try that, instead of being like, you fucking suck, or you're laughing at me for failing. It was more like anybody I talked to, I'm sure there was chatter like away from me about how brutal it was, and that this is going to be like a phase I go through or some shit. But it was really like nice of them to say, dude, that was tough. That was really rough. Like they knew how rough it was. But we're like, yeah, that took a lot of, guts to get up there and actually do that. And I got mostly people saying like, I would never have done that. I wouldn't have done that. Right.
Dude, just speaking in general, whether like I'm more nervous when I speak in front of 9 people of a group of friends that I know and they love me and I love them, but instead of an audience of 200 people,
Yeah. Yeah. Me too. I was like, were you, what were you like with girls in high school? Like I could do a show, but if I had to talk to a girl, I was completely useless.
Yeah, probably that till about senior year. It's so weird because I did comedy and then I got like, I wasn't by any means good or great, but I in myself, I had seen an improvement in me doing comedy, going to open mic every Tuesday. That helped, that boosted my confidence and for the rest of my life. I don't know what it is about. I was like, I found something I was quote good at so I could have more confidence in everything else.
I always felt like there was something weird with it with me where I just couldn't. I had no way to like flirt. I just didn't know how to do it. And in my head, I always felt like Superman that I can't tell you about it because you can't come to the club. You're too young, So I always felt like in my mind, I'm trying to talk to a girl and I like her, but she clearly has no idea I like her and has no interest because I don't know what I'm doing. And in my mind, I'm like, but if you saw that on stage, I can make a room full of people laugh, you would think I was awesome.
Yeah.
You would think, and it was so, oh man, it was so, frustrating at the time because you're a teenager, but looking back on it, it's really quite humorous.
Yeah, it's that the normal awkwardness, but you just were awkward in a unique way. And I was that way too, where it was like, no, my superpower, you just gotta be in this club where it's dark and there are people. Then I can show you I'm good at something, but it's like you gotta get there first. I can't just be funny right here because I'm too nervous.
Yeah. Oh man. Do you remember when you were a kid, did you watch stand up on TV?
At first I didn't. My brother would rent and I think it was at the time VHS tapes, and he would rent like Chris Rock, like Bigger and Blacker, and I think it was Bring the Pain or what, those couple specials, and he would rent them and I didn't know what they were, and I would watch a little bit of it. I'm like, this guy's just talking, like it's boring because I just didn't understand what stand-up was. And then eventually I would, I got the gist of it, and I would watch. Chappelle was a big one for me, and I remember 8th grade, it was the Chappelle show. So every Wednesday night you watch Chappelle show. So Thursday till the next Wednesday, you were quoting all those sketches.
Right.
And then Hedberg was another one for me, who I just happened to see his Comedy Central special. And I was like, man, this guy's so funny. And he's not looking at the camera. He's not looking at the audience. He's looking at the floor. Like you could still tell he's nervous, but he's just so funny.
Yeah, he was great, man. Mitch Hedberg was he was awesome. Do you remember the first comedian you ever saw live?
Yeah, it was the headliner at least was Kyle Cease.
Oh wow.
Yeah,
he's like a motivational speaker now, I think.
I know. I was at the library and he had like written a book. I was like, oh, like he's not that he was like a dirtbag before, but he had like cleaned up and looked professional for the book cover at least. And He was really funny. And then he had like this small part in this movie called Not Another Teen Movie. If you remember that one, his character was the guy that always started the slow clap. And then people would be like, dude, it's not the time to clap. But I just remember him from that movie. So that was one of the first ones was Kyle Cease. And then another one that really hit me just seeing at the local club here in Indianapolis was a guy named Kevin Downey Jr. was another one.
And was this when you had started doing stand-up, or were you just a fan going to a live show at that point?
I'd already been doing stand-up just in school and stuff. And again, nobody ever asked to see IDs and I didn't say anything. So I would go to these shows, and at the end of the show, they would give you a thing. At the time it was the shows were running from Wednesday to Sunday, and you could get in free Wednesday or Sunday if you brought this pass back. So eventually they would just be like, oh, that kid's here, just let him in. And they knew what I would drink was just a Coke anyway. So I would show up, they'd be like, hey, you can go over there, here's your drink. But I remember the first time being in a club, and I wasn't even going on, I was just seeing shows, and I got so nervous walking in to the club because I knew that's where I wanted to be, and I knew this is where I had to be, but I just got nervous because that's where it was going to happen, was the show eventually.
Do you remember the first time you were on stage and just like crushed?
I remember the second time I performed at a comedy club, I did well. And again, you probably would look back and be like, that's not good. It wasn't good, but I just remember doing well. I can tell you that one of the first times I bombed, I opened up for the improv troupe at my high school, and they just called it Whose Line Is It Anyway? Because that was the most accessible thing, because people would be like, what's improv? But if you just said Whose Line,
right.
You just, so I went up and opened for them. And of course I never had a place to work out material. So it was all new. And I just remember bombing and it going so bad that I didn't even hang out afterwards. I just left because I was like, I don't want to see these people after this.
Yeah, I've had quite a few of those nights where it's like, I gotta get out of here. I had a few nights where, because I was so young, and I grew up in London, Ontario, that only had one comedy club, and they did amateur night very sporadically. It wasn't weekly or monthly. It was like every few months they'd be like, anybody want to try this? And so my mom used to drive me to like Toronto and a couple hours away. And there were times I really ate shit and had to get in a car with my mother. And, just, I'm sure, I don't know what she was thinking. I'm sure it was like, my God, you're obviously never doing this again. Like, You know what I mean? But she never tried to talk me out of it, which was nice. She talked me through it and, tried to give from an audience perspective, like, here's what I think you did wrong, which in most cases was everything.
Well, yeah, it's so weird. We're like, you're first starting out, and like now you can go up and your thing that you're trying to focus on is your new joke. But when you're first starting out, it's like, I got to learn even how to stand properly, to take the mic out of the stand, to just not be nervous. Forever, I didn't even look at the people. I would like look over them. So if I was looking at this camera, it'd just be like, I'd be looking right over it. So there's so much that comes from being on stage so many times that you just become comfortable with it. And then you can kind of work on things.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, how long have you done stand-up like now to date from the time you really started?
I think, 15 years, I think that, about that.
Yeah. So like, and I think for anybody who's never done stand-up, 15 years obviously sounds like a long time. If you were at a job 15 years, you would have several promotions and probably in some sort of management or even, higher than that. But with stand-up, 15 years, especially in the beginning, like you were saying in the beginning, your first couple of years is maybe 5 to 6 shows total, in the whole time. So, how long into it did you start to feel comfortable and feel like, you had your own point of view and your own voice on stage?
Probably, 5 years ago, and maybe, 4 years ago, where I could go up, and it's that fine line, and as well as I do, being on stage, where you have to care, but you can't show that you care, because if you start sweating, the audience knows there's blood in the water. Right. They know you're weak. And that's, it's not that you're weak, but it's also like you have to go up and care, but not care. And you have to realize that this show that you're doing right now, currently, there's going to be another one, and there will be another one. So you can't put everything on the line during that show, because you will break yourself. If it doesn't go well, then you're devastated. But if
Yeah.
it doesn't yet, if it doesn't go well, you have to be like, I'll just get them next time. And you always want it to go well, but sometimes it just doesn't. And sometimes it's out of your hands.
Absolutely. When I was when I was 16, I entered this competition, funniest person in London,
Mm-hmm.
and it was really, it was like 9 comedians, all from London, all, nobody really doing it. It was just a bunch of people
Mm-hmm.
that, but one guy who was like, he was a professional motivational speaker and had done some amateur comedy. And then there's me, who for 2 years, every time, I can get on somewhere, my mom drove me to do it. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So I go out there, dude. I had the set of the night. I mean, it was very clear. I was the youngest kid, lots of sympathy, brought tons of people that I knew, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they gave it to the guy who did the motivational speaking. And I had put everything on it and thought it was
Mm-hmm.
like my shot. I was fucking done at the end. I was like, well,
At
that's
16,
it. Yeah,
I'm done.
16.
I've had
Dude,
plenty of those
yeah.
shows now where you just are like, yeah, and you can't believe that guy won. And then you find out for most contests, they don't matter anyways.
No.
It was just a gimmick to get people in the door.
Yeah.
So that's the thing is you put so much on that one set and it just breaks you. But then eventually you come back, hopefully,
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it took me, I don't remember. I've quit several times. I've had several of those moments where it's just like, no, fuck it. I quit,
Yeah.
And then the next day I'm emailing the people I normally email and back to work, cause what else am I going to do?
It is that one thing where, before, the pandemic, I haven't been on stage that much in the past year, but before, every couple weeks I get in my head, I'm like, man, what am I doing?
Yeah.
Like, I guess that's a healthy thing to question what you're doing. I think in the performing arts, at least if you're, I don't know if a painter's like, man, what am I doing? I should just go get a real job or whatever. But I at least you're not like, I'm the best ever. Cause that's dangerous too.
Oh, that's brutal. That's brutal. Oh, okay. So it's tough in the moment, but I really enjoy watching it. Have you ever seen somebody eat shit hard, but they have zero clue, and when they get off, they thought it went well?
Yeah. I ran open mic for 8 years. So I would see that a lot, and you would see the same people that had probably been doing it longer than I have, do stand up, and they come to the show and they never have written a single joke since their first 2 years in comedy. And I've seen people get less funny. You'd think like that the more you do it, you just pick up some skills, but I've just seen people somehow get less funnier over time. It's really bizarre, but it's, some people you come to realize that maybe that 5 minutes that guy does every month, that's kind of his thing. And he doesn't really want to go past that. And you have to come to terms with yourself that, oh, he doesn't want the same thing out of this that I want.
Right. Yeah. Which is fine. I mean, as long as those, which I sometimes really enjoy those type of guys. I just think their approach, sometimes is hilarious because they really don't give a shit. It's like, I just want to get away from my wife and children and have some chicken wings, and also get up and talk about my dick for a few moments. If you'll indulge me,
I don't want to talk about insurance all day or whatever they do, so
yeah.
No, I get that for sure.
This episode of Leeson Learned is sponsored by the Big Fish Steak and Lounge in Sarnia, Ontario. One of my personal favorite restaurants in the world. I was going to say in the country, but no, in the world. They have some of the greatest food I have ever had. Every single time I eat there, I think to myself, it will never get better than what I have just eaten. And the next time I go back, they top it once again. It's that good. If you live in the Sarnia area, make sure you book your reservation for lunch or dinner, or hell, book your reservation for both right now. Do it tonight. What are you going to cook for dinner tonight? Probably something awful. Don't do that. Head on over to the Big Fish Steak and Lounge. If you don't live in Sarnia, I suggest you make a trip down just for the food, or if you're going to be in the area, stop in and have one of the greatest meals you will ever have.
I want to talk to you about the road, because you obviously being based out of Indianapolis, you mentioned being a road guy, a road
Mhm.
comic. And for anybody, again, who's not doing stand-up, there's kind of, I mean, there's several types of comedians, but for easy's sake, let's break it down. There's the people that are in the major cities that are doing like club shows for, you know, short sets, and they're kind of working on shorter sets. And then every once in a while they might get a tour or something like that. Obviously, if they're big, it's a way different. We're not even talking about those people. We're
Mhm.
talking about at a different level. So, and then the other side of that is people like myself, yourself, that are road warriors that go to wherever someone will pay them to come and tell jokes. Doesn't
Mhm.
necessarily have to be a comedy club. Doesn't even necessarily have to be a full-time venue either.
Yeah.
Just somewhere where somebody is offering you money to go. What was your first introduction to the road where it was like, whoa, what is this?
Well, I can tell you my first quote road gig, and that was an hour north of where I lived, and I had my brother came with me because I had just was like been driving for 2 years and never even driven on the interstate really. So it was like I don't like all I would have had to done is get on two exits or whatever and get on the highway for a little bit. But I was like, this is my first road show. And I don't know how to get to this place. This was like MapQuest, so it wasn't like type it in on your phone or whatever. And my first road gig, I did 5 minutes and probably ate shit, but it was at a Viking themed bar where like they had like a dragon that would come in and out of the walls. And it's a really cool bar. I've been there back there since then, but that was my first like road thing, was doing 5 minutes and at this Viking bar. But one of my, some of my first road things, I remember I finished school in 2012, and it was one of those where I was getting enough work locally at a club, and that was the thing, is I just didn't have any bills. So I was like, okay, that week at the club pays for my rent. So then if I could find some other stuff, then I have enough money. So I went to school for radio and stuff like that. So I was like, I could try and get a real job, or I could do stand up. And so far it's worked out. And that's with like moving. I lived with my mom for a long time, but eventually I was doing 45 and 47 weeks a year. So there was no point in me even having a place to come back to for 2 days and pay rent on nothing that I wasn't there. But I just love, there's something about driving. Have you driven through like the upper peninsula of Michigan? For you, it would be, lower, but just those where it's like, it's that Bob Seger song, Turn the Page, where you walk into that place and everybody turns around and they know that you're not from there, either because they just know everybody, or you're at your 8.5 by 11 computer paper headshot is on the wall, and you're like, then they're like, you better be funny. I'm like, I guess, because if I'm not, then I'll just be a true crime podcast subject or whatever, like I love those kinds of gigs. I love, clubs where they treat you well, but I also just love, and I say shithole lovingly, where it's like just those no name towns that you go to and do a show too.
As you were telling that story, I'm having images of probably the place it was, but I've just seen so many of them. But I remember being up in the upper Michigan Peninsula. But you mentioned the headshots, which the kids these days, they will never understand. But when you got booked somewhere, you had to mail, as in go to a place and put it in a mailbox for someone else to take a physical headshot that at one time had to be black and white for some odd reason. And then over time, they're like, okay, you can take a color one, but you had to spend the money to get them done and then printed and then get your headshot sent so that they could promote the show by putting the face of a comedian nobody knows or has ever heard of on the door, and sometimes above the urinals.
Definitely above the urinals. But that even goes further back, which I thankfully I never had to do this, but I would hear comics, especially in the 80s and 90s, were like, yeah, I had to mail out this tape, a physical tape to a club. And I can't imagine now. It would be a YouTube link, But before, it's like having 30 VHS tapes of your 8-minute set and mailing it for the guy not to watch it, or maybe to watch it and half-heartedly. I can't imagine the internet has made it so much easier to get booked.
Dude, so much easier. When I was graduating from high school, the year I graduated, right before that summer, I sent out email was sort of a thing, but not very many people had it. And cold calling wasn't something I was comfortable doing because I still sort of sounded like a kid, but I mean, I could have been a man, but you never know. So I sent like a typed out letter with a promotional picture, called the tour the Laugh It Up tour, and pretended to be my agent, saying, you got to book this this young new comedian, fresh on the scene, doing a big tour this summer. And I sent out 200 of them to bars, like any kind of bar, venue, whatever. 200 or maybe 100 of them. Yeah, I think it was maybe 100 of them all over Ontario. Like every small town had a bar and every big town had a bunch of them and stuff. And I booked 11 of them. And that was my first tour.
How did that go? Were people like, this is your first tour? We could tell.
There was 11 of them. I'm going to say out of 11, 5 were like that, where it was like, this was your first, we can tell, and this will be your last time here.
Yeah.
For the other 6 of them, they ranged from, one of them was an unbelievable like experience that kept me going. I think if that hadn't happened, I might have questioned things at the end of that, but there was one that was exceptionally good. And the rest were like, good try. And good for you for being so young and doing this and trying this. Because there was a lot of older audiences, especially in the smaller towns.
Yeah, it's that and I don't know if you have them in Canada, like a VFW or a Moose Lodge or an Elks Lodge, or you do a show there. Yeah, Legions, where it's like,
yeah,
and it's not, like I'm saying, it sounds weird. It's not like the old people hangout, because those people went there when they were young, but that's been their hangout for a while. And I've done so many shows where you're just like, I don't even know how to connect with these people. Like, I just better swear a lot. But then also sometimes you're like, don't swear. We don't like that. But then afterwards they're like, man, that was so fucking funny. And you're like, oh, okay. Just the one guy that booked it didn't want to get in trouble or whatever.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's tough on the road too, because each gig like comes with their own set of specific instructions, or no instructions at all, where they're just like, go ahead. The worst ones are where they're like, go ahead, say whatever you want. You say something somebody doesn't like, and at the end they're like, why the fuck would you say that?
Because you said so.
Yeah.
I remember one time I did this gig and I walked in, and of course this guy just starts, the show is an hour before the show, and he was like, you guys gonna be funny tonight? One of those. And I'm like, we'll see. And he's like, my name's whatever. I like to have fun during the show. And then you talk to the bartender, like, yeah, that's Ricky. He talks to the comics, and you're like, okay, good. So this is just a regular thing that Ricky does, but they're not going to kick him out because he's drinking $80 that night or whatever.
Right. Yeah. It's always like their number one customer is the one guy that's the worst for the show, but the best for their business.
Yeah. Yeah. Just if you drink a lot, you can do whatever during a comedy show. They're not going to kick you out. So
you mentioned your first gig was obviously doing 5 minutes. What was the first time that you got on the road as like an opening act where you got to travel, do a little bit more time? How was that experience?
Yeah, it was one of those where then you realize you work so hard. You know, if people listening, usually the show goes opener, MC, or then the feature comic, and then the headliner comic. And then once you're kind of at the feature level, then you can kind of go on the road, and you learn quickly that a lot of these places where you're featuring, you're also the host because they don't have a host, or the
Right.
local radio guy goes up, but all he's doing is, hey, thanks for listening to whatever, here's your first comic. So they're not warmed up, so you learn quickly how to be your host and MC and the feature comic. Just you learn to take that bullet that's 10 minutes long of getting chuckles versus warmed up audience. And I remember, again, the first time you do a spot, you're probably the worst you're going to be at it. So if you're like, this is my first feature week, you're like, oh, you're not good at this spot.
Right.
You learn quickly to, again, develop a thick skin. And, if you get heckled, because I've had a couple times where people, you not even like malicious, but they just will groan. And you're like, that's a smart joke. But then that groan is infectious and people start to believe the show is not good. But in your mind, it's like, I know this stuff is good, but I just have to trick you into thinking it's good. And it's I don't know, you get used to being on the road. I like being on the road, and if I can bring somebody with me, that's cool. But I also like being alone. I don't know if you're the same way.
Yeah, I actually, that was one of my favorite things about it, off the bat, was when I was opening. Typically, I wasn't traveling with whoever was headlining. I was meeting them at I was usually doing a string of one-nighters. So sometimes it was 4 different people in a week, or sometimes you work with a guy on Wednesday and somebody at a club Thursday to Saturday. But one of my favorite things was that time alone in the car driving, being able to think, especially if I had a fucking disaster the night before, to wrap my head around, first of all, not quitting, or driving off the road, or something that, like, just kind of talking myself through it. And that was something I really I had heard a lot of comedians, like famous comedians, talk about the road and how tough it is being alone and stuff like that. But that was one thing that I was really nervous about, but immediately was like, I actually really enjoy this.
Dude, I love being alone. And, there's a difference between lonely and being alone. You could be lonely in a crowded room, but alone, I love the time to think. And it's one of those where you play back if something bad happened. It's like watching film when you're a football player or whatever sport. You're like, what happened? You just replay that in your head, and hopefully it doesn't, you don't drift off the road, like you said.
Yeah. Dude, I remember the first time. It's a little bit different. The Canadian comedy industry and the American road comedy industry, especially back, not necessarily right now, obviously, but years ago, and especially when I was like early 20s and getting out on the road, I loved doing the American shows a lot more, because there was way more opportunity for those one-nighters in a really small town somewhere in the middle of nowhere, with those locals that just they're either going to love you or hate you, but it's going to be a unanimous decision because they all talked about it beforehand, or they've been here every week or whatever. But I always really enjoyed the one-nighters in America, because you could string them together as well. So you felt like you were really on tour. And I remember the first time I had to drive through North Dakota, and I'm sitting there in the car, like everything's fine and whatever. And then all of a sudden I get to a spot where I realize, like, I'm in a snowbank. It's on either side of me, on both sides of the highway, and the ground, I can't see the ground anymore. And I'm just like, oh my God, like, I'm from Canada and I had never really seen this crazy, amount of snow on a highway and all that shit. Have you ever had any crazy, like, driving experiences, any crashes, hit an animal of any sort?
I've hit a deer. I got something out of it. I got a bit out of it, at least. Like, I got this car's ruined, but I'm going to get something out of it.
It's always a great trade with a comedian.
Yeah, and it's so weird, and I'm not going to say PTSD, because that seemed a little extreme, but now on the road driving at night, you're like little paranoid, because again, I think I could survive hitting a deer because I did at 75, but you never know. Something could go through the windshield, but it's always, you're looking to the sides of the road just to see, because I've driven and you just see the deer standing at the side of the road like they're about to hitchhike.
Right.
Like, so now I'm just paranoid about that. But then years ago I had one where I think I was driving from Chicago to Wisconsin, and of course it was December, January, or February. And I'm doing this lodge, is a casino lodge show, and the last 2 hours, it took me 3 hours to drive the 2 hours, and it was one of those where you're just so tense because you can't take one hand off the steering wheel because you just never know what's going to happen, and driving for that long. And by the time you get to the thing, you're exhausted because your body has been so tense the whole time. And I get to the casino gig, and the whole time I'm like, there's no way we're doing the show, but I'm going to show up so I can at least get paid for it. And you show up and they're like, yep, we're doing the show. But by the way, the weather's so bad, we already shut down the gambling tables and the buffet. So everything is shut down. And we do the show, and it's me and the feature comic. And it's one of those where like there's a dance floor, tables, and then the stage. So you're separated by like 50 feet.
Oh no.
And
which is for anybody who doesn't do comedy, an absolute nightmare.
Yeah, the ideal comedy is you want to like be able to touch the ceiling of the place that you're at, and then the first table from the stage. That's what I like. So there's just this giant space. You can kind of hear the slot machines, and the show ended up being fine because people trickled in. But it was, again, people weren't there for the show. They were just there because that was the only open bar in the place. So you're just like, you do your time and get through it. But it was like the closest to The Shining I've ever been in, because it's like, no. And I literally had gotten stuck in the parking lot in my car. So they had a guy going around in the parking lot getting people out unstuck. So that's what was how I spent my morning, was getting unstuck. But it was one of those where I was like, man, this was a lot of work for a downer of a show, but it is what it is,
Yeah, absolutely. Oh man. The other part of being on the road is the hotel situation, or sometimes lack of, or motel, in often cases. Any of those motel or hotel horror stories come to mind?
Thankfully not, unless they're like the money's so good on the gig that I'll be like, I'll get my own hotel. And then I'm the kind of guy, like, I'll do like the Red Roof Inn, and I've stayed in some decent Red Roof, and I'm not saying anything about the chain, but anytime you're driving up to your door, that's never good. Right. And so some of that is self-imposed, where I'm like, I'm trying to save as much money as I can. Mostly I've had like bad condos, and for people listening, condo, it's just like it could be a house that the club bought and now they're letting the comics stay at, or an apartment or whatever. And the quintessential comedy condo to me would be like, you walk in and it's a big tube TV, not a flat screen, but a tube TV. And that flat screens have been out long enough to where you could find an old flat screen. But it'll be a tube TV sitting on one of the tables that the club has in the showroom. Like they're like, we need a table, and then all the the chairs or whatever. And the thing is, as long as it's clean and the internet works, I don't care. I'm super low maintenance when it comes to that stuff. But when you walk in and the TV says, oh, there's something wrong with the internet, and then the owner's like, yeah, it's been broken for weeks. It's like, no, you haven't paid the bill in weeks. I know how this works. So that kind of stuff. Or you get to the hotel room and you're like, you just want to sleep on top of the bed. You don't want to pull the covers back. One of those where you're like, you just don't want to touch anything. You feel gross afterwards. But thankfully those haven't been a lot. I remember, I don't know if you've done this one, but there's a gig in Minot, South Dakota, maybe. It's wherever Jack Link's beef jerky is, like, that's their factory. Okay. And that was one where within the past couple of years where they give you a real key to the hotel. And so it's like a physical key. That's a throwback. And the hotel was fine. But it was just like one of those where I've been on the road so long, but it's always a card, but they're like, nope, it's a key. And the show was great. It was in an old funeral home that they turned into a community center. So like you're literally standing clearly where the casket would be. That's the stage. and they have like those accordion dividers that, divide the room, and they give you like the community center is owned by Jack Links. So like they give you this beef jerky basket or whatever. So everything about the show is great, but it's just so weird to get the real key to do it in a funeral home. And there's no, it's a funeral home, and those are the kind of shows that I love, because it's like you can go to a club and the shows are great, but you don't get those stories of the people that you meet there.
Yeah, absolutely. Those small town road gigs, they are and forever will be my absolute favorite. The even just the people, like some of the characters that live. What's always been fascinating to me is you go to these places and sometimes we're only there for one night or even just a couple hours. Like sometimes you're in and out, and you meet a character that you have an exchange with for like maybe an hour. And I always think about them the next day and be like, but that's his life.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? That guy he wasn't playing. I describe him as a character, but that's just how he is. And he's that way now at home with his wife and children, the same way. He wasn't, performing this, piece as an artist for me.
Yeah.
That's just how he is, I love
weird
that
when you meet those, and I'll say small town people, and I'm not being shitty about it, but I'm saying you've met those people where clearly they have never left their town that doesn't even have a stoplight, and there's nothing wrong with that. But it's in my head, I'm like, man, don't you want to go somewhere and see some other stuff? So thankfully, that part of me has, been filled by comedy. But you just met people and you're like, they've never left the town, that, they could tell you everything about the town. And the big trip that they do is to the Walmart at the bigger town farther away. And again, nothing wrong with those people, but that's just bizarre behavior to me, because I'm not that person.
Have you ever had, obviously every comedian deals with hecklers in some way, but have you ever had one that was just stands out above the rest as exceptionally brutal?
Usually, like, if I go into a show and I know that it's going to be the perfect setup for hecklers, is I just don't stop talking and I'm loud. Like I did a show at a prison before and I got heckled by those guys, but none of it was like malicious. Thankfully, I've never had like a lot of like, you suck. They probably were thinking it, but I've never had that kind of heckle. But I've had like, the prisoners would be like, I guess I hit a joke that struck a chord, because they were like, man, you stupid. And it was, like, I was like, okay, good. I got a you stupid from the prisoners. And like the guy, one of the guys up front had an eye patch, and literally they called him Lucky. And you're just like, come on, man. Like, that's just too funny. And some of the guys clearly had just gotten off whatever work thing they were doing that day and still had their orange vests on, but no shirt. Like there was no like dress policy or whatever. But again, that could have gone another way and just been really bad, but thankfully it ended up being good. But as far as like people being shitty and heckling, like thankfully I've just not had that happen very often. And if I did, it was just, I've never been the guy that'll like slam a heckler, because I'm not that quick anyway. So usually it's just like me handling it or just ignoring it till the show was over.
What was the last regular like day job you had before going full time with stand up?
I worked at a hospital in the kitchen. I would work like so you'd have like the literal assembly line. So you start with the tray and you'd have this highlighter and it was like a receipt. So you'd highlight like the first guy, he'd get all the salt and pepper and condiments and silverware. And so you would highlight all that stuff. Then you'd pass it down the conveyor belt. And you'd have a guy that your job was just called beverage. So you put all the drinks on the tray, and on the other side of the line was like the cooks that put the hamburgers or whatever you're serving on that day. So that was like the last real gig. I had driven for Uber a little bit, which I liked that job. I don't know if you've ever done that before, but it's meeting different people. I had substitute taught a little bit, but the last thing where it was like I, had scheduled hours to be there was that hospital gig.
What kind of teacher were you?
I don't know. It was like I was in that comic mode where a kid would say something shitty and I would want to like slam them and treat them like a heckler, but I'm also like, man, you can't say that to a kid. Like,
right.
I want to come back and teach. So I would mostly try to get like I would teach like computer or PE or art, one of those one-off things where you had them for an hour, because I think you can at least keep kids' respect for an hour, and then you get a new group. Because I've done the all day thing, and by the end of it, like, yeah, I'm a guy. They'll just walk all over me. And I'd had other teachers come in and be like, "Will you guys keep it down?" And I'm like, "I'm so sorry." They're like, "No, you're totally fine." You could just tell that, like, oh, they know these kids are assholes,
right?
And, so yeah, those were fun, and I like doing that thing too. I was thankfully not had a lot of jobs that I've hated. It was weird going in at the hospital because I would have to be there at 6:30 in the morning, and I remember doing shows literally where I would be at like this theater at a college, opening for somebody, having a great set, and then okay, I got to drive back and sleep for 4 hours, and then now I'm putting drinks on trays, and I'm like, if you could just, if that's that Superman thing where it's like, if you could just see my superpower, where I was really funny over here, but nobody gives a shit now because they need their cranberry juice.
Yeah. Oh man. Yeah, dude, I know that pain. I know that pain so well. There was a brief time there for, I don't even know how many years, but I had a really vicious cycle where every June I would have to gain employment because I knew summers were dead, typically on the road or not enough. So from June till the end of August, I knew I had to get something, and I was really good at interviewing. I could really convince someone I wanted this job, but I also knew that come September, my road schedule is going to pick back up. And so I had quite the cycle of like gaining jobs from, June, and then either being fired in August because I started calling in sick more because I started booking all the fall shows, or just where it was like, I gotta quit. And there was no 2 weeks notice. It was like, I have to go now. I'm sorry, but
I have a thing that starts in 40 minutes. I'm leaving. Yeah. What kind of jobs would you get that you would like, did you interview for a lot and get one, or were you like a certain type of job that you would try to get?
So for a time I was looking for like a driver position because I just wanted to be by myself and not, I didn't know
talking to people.
Yeah. Cause I couldn't have a boss. I knew, geez, I've probably known since I was like 12 years old that I can't have a boss. So I knew that like, if I'm going to have a job, it's going to have to be, by myself driving around all day or whatever. So I've done a lot of like delivery driver, that kind of stuff. And then sales, I've gotten a few sales jobs. One in particular that was like a pretty, like I could have done really well there if I gave a shit. And I didn't realize it at the time, because I would get like retail sales jobs and, seasonal shit and stuff like that. But that was like a bigger thing where I was like, oh shit, like I have my own, not office, but like my own space and my own computer. And like, oh fuck, this company's like entrusting me to, enhance their sales. And I'm just thinking about September,
Yeah. Or you're like, if they bump me up, now I'm stuck here forever. If I get the next position up. So I did that too, where they're like, you want to be manager? Because I worked at Arby's too. And they were like, do you want to be a manager? I'm like, no, man. Because I just knew if I did that, I was going to be there for a lot longer than I wanted to be.
Yeah. That was one thing I was always really nervous about, but very luckily I was such a bad employee that was never I was never offered any promotions or there was none of that. It was we can tell that you do not care and you bring nothing, no value to this position. I remember, dude, I delivered coffee. That was one of my jobs. Like not cups of coffee, but I mean like I would
Bags of coffee or whatever.
Yeah, and fill coffee machines for office buildings, right?
Okay.
So I brought like new coffee that they could have if the machine ever went out and they had to dump beans in if I wasn't there or whatever. And you would go back. And I remember the guy training me is you would work by yourself. And that's what I liked about it was I loaded my coffee and then I'm in the truck for the day. So it's all good. And the guy training me, he goes, okay, you're going to have to clean the machines, right? And he goes, don't worry. You don't have to do it often. You have to do it once every, like, I don't know, 4 months or 3 months. And at the time I'm like, okay, July, August. I don't need to know any of this shit. Yeah. And he's like showing me how to clean the thing. Right. And I'm, nodding my head. And then he's like, now, if you really want to go the extra mile and you really want to
stop there.
No, yeah. I'm not even going the first mile to begin with. I'm going to be leaving before that mile comes to me. So there's no way I'm going an extra mile on top of that when I didn't even start. Yeah. And I just remember him getting out this fucking little tiny, like, thing that looks like an someone working on fossils would use to like clear it off. Yeah. And he got so precise with it, dude. And you could tell his passion level. And I wanted to come clean with him and just be like, dude, like, you're wasting so much of your time right now. I don't give a fuck at all about any of this. I'll never use that thing ever.
Yeah.
Certainly not for this. I might brush some weed off of the van, like, because I don't want you guys to know I smoked in here, but that's about it. So yeah, man, I was a terrible employee. So I was never in danger of anybody wanting to move me up. That was never any issue.
And I guess till I wasn't, I was always a good employee. At the end, you would get some call-ins because I would get offered gigs, and it was just like I'd probably be losing money on it, taking the gig versus going to work. And then eventually, I got a writing job for a radio show, and I just was like, "That's more money for less work," and I'm like taking my brain to the gym to write, so I was like, and I had like a comedy festival, and I was like, dude, I'm going to be honest with you. That thing is in 2 weeks when I'm supposed to work next, and I'm just not coming. So I'd rather, so you could just get somebody, and I'm sure you appreciate that too.
You mentioned the writing on the show. Was that Bob and Tom?
Yeah, I still work for them. So if people don't know, it's a nationally syndicated radio show, and at least in the US. So just before I hopped on with you, I was finishing writing. So it's still like a good, I don't know. It's just really helped me, I think, in my writing. Just sometimes you don't want to write, but it's like you got to. So you learn how to, like, I don't know. And like I told my wife last night, it took me forever to write. I was like, I'm just not funny tonight. It's like some days it clicks and sometimes it doesn't.
Oh, dude, absolutely. And I just want to go back to the Bob and Tom show, like a legendary show. I mean, been around for
over 30 years.
Yeah.
And especially they're based in Indy. So it's, if you do comedy in Indy, people, that's the first thing people say is, "Oh, have you been on Bob and Tom?" That kind of thing,
Yeah, and a huge credit, like especially in the Midwest. Like I remember years and years ago, probably my mid-20s, I got a opportunity to be on their show because I was doing a show in like Mason City, Illinois, the Mason City Limits, which is one of my favorite towns and clubs ever.
I love it. You can hear the toilet flush upstairs during the show which I've only been to that club once, but I like the guy Chris, and I like that venue so much.
Yeah. So it's everything about it is awesome, and the town is amazing. And it was one of my first like headlining runs through the US, and I was able to just like utilize that to get on the show, and it was like both of them worked together.
Mm-hmm.
And I was, man, it was really an honor to be on that. And it felt to me like a break You know what I mean? Like, not like the Tonight Show, but like that type of thing where it was like, this is an elevating level. And I always really appreciated being on there. But I have one of the things about being on there is I had no idea they're so fast. It works so quickly that I remember feeling like all of my powers had been stripped away. And I've been on twice now, and both times I felt more like a person who got a free ticket to watch the show in the studio, because I had no idea when to jump in. It was just so fast. They're that good.
And it's one of those, again, where you go back to, let me show you my Superman power over here. And this thing, like, because on an even day, there's minimum of 4 people on the show, sometimes more. And their rapport is so good of 30 years of knowing somebody. So you can say something without saying it. You know what I'm saying? So, and the last thing you want to do is like step on, especially for me, who's employed by the show. I don't want to say the wrong thing. And then there goes my spot on the show and my extra gig on the side, you know?
Right. Yeah, man. And it's so, like, I remember just sitting there, especially the last time I was on, which was like 2019. And I was doing, I think I was on there for the Mark Ridley's, like I was promoting a weekend there. And I just remember being like, okay, this time I want to jump in. I'm in my 30s now. I feel more comfortable. I know who I am as a person and a comedian a lot more. And I'm not this guy who, like, when I was on the show the first time, I almost felt like a fraud. Like I snuck my way in the back door to headline a club. You know what I mean? And so I was like, I felt good. And then this time I'm a minute or two in, I'm just like, boom, boom, just watching. And then eventually I'm just like sitting back, just, one side to the other in complete awe. And I don't know, they asked me one question. I think I said maybe 2 words or something. Like I was just watching the show. It was almost like watching TV, and every one of the characters turns to you and asks you a question. You're like, holy fuck, are you talking to me?
Yeah. I'm part of the cast now all of a sudden.
Yeah. It's such a rapport that those guys have, and so quick. Like, I dealing with hecklers and being on stage, as we develop that quickness, and you got to be quick to survive sometimes, but in there it's like a whole other level.
Yeah, because it's one of those where they're kind and friendly, but then they're so good that you have no other choice but then to realize that is their domain,
Right. Oh, it's remarkable. And I felt honored, because like it is a legendary show. I just felt honored to be like in that seat and just, watching them work. It was really cool.
It's you're tired after being on the show, because you feel like it's like that drive through the snow. You feel like you have to be on the whole time.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. But I also felt like I was off the whole time and somebody was holding the button for on because I didn't have to be. It was like, you can just sit and chill for this whole thing. And then at the end, they said my name twice, and that was,
that's it. That's enough.
Yeah. They welcome. Thank you. Boom, 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 boom. All right, get out of here. Yeah. It was great, man. I love that show. Well, thank you so much, man. I really appreciate you doing this and taking the time, and congratulations on all the success and everything with the videos, the podcasts, and I hope to do a show with you again soon, a live show at some point, and be able to work together with an actual audience.
Yeah, what live people? That'll be strange.
Yeah, it will be very strange. But yeah, thank you so much, man. And I really appreciate you being here and taking the time.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me on.
huge thank you to Brent Terhune for being here today. Make sure you follow him on all social media. Check out his Facebook and YouTube videos. They are absolutely hilarious. And check out both of his podcasts as well. They are fantastic. Thank you guys so much. Thanks for being here. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. If you want to, if it's not too much trouble, it'd be great if you'd go over to our YouTube channel, The Jeff Leeson Show. Click subscribe. Click that notification bell as well so you know anytime that we upload a brand new video so that you can check it out. That way you know when it's happening. You know it's happening now and you can go check it out immediately. Thank you guys so much. Thanks for everything. Thank you. If you've listened every week, I really, truly appreciate it more than you will ever know unless we meet in person and have a few minutes and then I'll explain it all to you. But thank you guys. I hope you have a great night. I seriously do. Depending on when you're listening to it. Maybe it is night. Then I hope you have a great day. And if it's day, I hope you have a great night. If it's the afternoon, I hope both your morning and evening are great as well as your afternoon. You know what I mean. I just hope you're having a great fucking time. Thank you guys. Have a great whatever. And see ya. Guns. Guns? I'm doing guns. If you're listening, I'm doing double finger guns. And it looks ridiculous. And I regret doing it. See you next week, everybody.